My name is Philip Greenish. I'm Chief Executive of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight to take part in tonight's event, Greening UK Energy. Is it a business opportunity or a brake on growth? Well, growth is quite rightly high on the government's agenda, but so are the environmental commitments that the government has entered into. And within this, there are many issues that have to be considered: how our energy is generated, the skills agenda, to how the regulatory regime can foster or perhaps impede innovation. And it's a very important debate for this Academy and, of course, for many others. And we're very pleased to have your contribution and the contribution of our panellists tonight. We want to give all sides of the debate a hearing, and we're going to hear different views from our expert panel who've agreed to be quizzed by you. And I do thank our panel for taking part. They will be introduced by our chair for tonight, Evan Davis. So it's my pleasure to introduce him. He takes no introduction, of course. He's a broadcaster, he's an economist. And we were particularly pleased when he agreed to chair tonight's event. As anybody who listens to or watches the BBC will know, he has a detailed understanding of both the financial climate in which business operates and of the manufacturing environment in the UK. Finally, it also gives me huge pleasure to welcome you to our newly renovated premises here at the Royal Academy of Engineering. This is the Forum for Engineering. This space and the other spaces in this building is where we will use to contribute to our mission, to inform, to inspire, to excite. And I'm quite sure we're going to do all of those things tonight. Thank you for missing the first half of the England football match, for those of you who are interested in such things. Once the debate is over, there will be a drinks reception downstairs where you gathered for tea earlier. And in the adjacent room, for those of you who are desperate, we will be showing the second half of the football match. Could I ask you please to engage with us often? We enjoy having people like you here. Please use this space and help us to reinforce the message that engineering is and should be seen to be right at the heart of society. And without further ado, if I could invite Evan to continue with the proceedings.
Thank you very much indeed, Philip. I'm going to stay here to chair this, just to slightly minimise the getting up and sitting down. Good evening and welcome. One of the great things about the football being on tonight is that we know everybody who's here really does want to be here, and you're all very keen. How many of you actually identify as engineers of one kind or another? And how many of you would consider yourself primarily policymakers of one kind or another? Okay, so it's about sort of 6 to 1, 5 to 1, engineers to policymakers. Economists and engineers don't always see eye to eye, but I'm delighted you've got me to oversee this meeting, which is primarily for engineers. One of the things I like about engineers is that they're very practical people and get things done, unlike the rest of us who talk about things. So a debate on greening the economy with non-engineers would probably end up as a debate about should we green the economy? Is it really necessary? Not how. And today, I'd like us, if we can, to focus more on the implementation. And so population growth in the world is very interesting, and the shaky forecasting abilities of climate scientists are always concerning, and the arguments over peak oil are obviously very relevant. But I'd like us really not to focus on the desirability of greening the economy. We're not going to avoid that completely, because there are important issues about how much we should do it if no one else is doing it, and those kinds of things. But I'm really just saying let's not have an argument over anthropomorphic global warming tonight, because we do that very often. 3 things matter to me in this debate. First of all is the economic imperative, which is the experience of the UK over the last 2 or 3 decades, probably, is that we've had a pretty successful economy, more successful than most people appreciate from where we are at the moment, in terms of productivity growth, moving to new industries, carving out individual niche for our country that is different from that of China and Germany and other places. But the truth is, we've let our export sector grow too small, and it now has to get bigger. We have to shrink some bits of the economy, bits that are mostly directed towards domestic services, and we have to produce more exports. Or to caricature it, we have to close down shopping centres and open some factories. That's more or less the economic imperative. So that's number one. The second great area which interacts with that, and will be on our agenda tonight, is the need to develop a less carbon-intensive economy and the need to find mechanisms that drive us towards that. So it's not just about decreeing what we want, it's about finding sensible and optimal ways to get us from where we are to where we want to be. So that's the, if you like, the environmental imperative. The third, and I think the bit that often gets neglected, and I'm sure will not be neglected here tonight, is what I would call the innovation challenge. It's not just about building more factories and building less carbon-intensive energy sources, for example. There's also, and perhaps the biggest single thing, is how we get more clever, how we actually innovate in terms of greening the economy. And I don't know if any of you heard the Today programme this morning. We interviewed Bjorn Lomborg. You probably know of Bjorn Lomborg. He was on the programme this morning. He wrote a really quite hilarious paper excoriating attack on the Club of Rome and the tracts written in the 1970s called Limits to Growth. So the Limits to Growth was the great kind of doom-laden scenario painted by experts in the 1970s with computer models of how we were going to hell in a handcart, and we were going to be suffocating under pollution, starving because we didn't have enough food, and running out of resources. And Bjorn Lomborg correctly points out this hasn't in fact happened. And he takes, for example, the example of mercury, which according to Limits to Growth was going to run out in 10 years, and the price was going to go astronomically high. And it didn't. And he says it didn't because technological change meant we didn't use mercury for all the things we used to use it. We don't make batteries with it. We don't make thermometers with it. And so mercury is now a tenth of the price it was when they wrote it had 10 more years before it ran out. And we were doomed. But the general point, I mean, I thought it was just a very interesting discussion with him because I read The Limits to Growth when I was doing my A-levels and was petrified about where we were all going. And it's just interesting to hear a reflection 40 years on that it didn't turn out to be the case. But the basic point was what stopped it turning out to be the case was innovation and technological change. So identifying that, the technological imperative, is the third. So we've got the environmental imperative, the economic imperative, and the technological one. There are a lot of issues bound up here. We may find our proceedings a little bit all over the place. What we're going to do is hear some opening words from our panellists. No more than 5 minutes, which means no more than 5 minutes. That means it can be less than 5 minutes. And we'll let them sort of set out their stall. They can either do that at the podium if they want to, or they can do it from their seats. It's entirely up to them. Let me introduce them in no particular order. Jane Atkinson on my right here, your left, is Vice President of Utilities Operations of Sembcorp Limited, UK Limited. Sembcorp is a Singapore-based multinational. It's a utility company with operations in Bournemouth and Teesside here. And Jane is responsible for day-to-day operations and maintenance of the utilities business up north with the UK's first biomass power plant in her patch. She's a fellow of the Institution of Chemical Engineers. Jürgen Meyer is the Director of Siemens UK and Ireland Industry Sector. You don't need me to tell you who Siemens are. I have a brand new dishwasher sitting in my kitchen waiting to be taken out of the box. You'll be pleased to know.
Much more interesting things than that.
Yeah, I can tell you. Very interested to get that right. So that's Siemens. Sir Alan Rudge on the right there has a pretty long CV. He's a Deputy Chairman of Experian Group. He's been a Pro-Chancellor of the University of Surrey, Deputy Chief Executive of BT. He was Chairman of W.S. Atkins until 2001, so has been in many, many roles there. And next to me here, Gareth Stace is Head of Climate and Environment Policy at the EEF, which used to be known as the Engineering Employers Federation, but which is sort of rebranded and is the the trade body for manufacturers. of whom Siemens is about a third of the total membership. No, that's an exaggeration. Gareth has authored, I should say, co-authored this Green and Growth, Solutions for Growing a Green Economy. But with no further ado, Sir Alan, would you like to start us off? And I know you've stated in the past that green energy policies introduced in the UK can have a disastrous effect on UK industry. Maybe you can just set out your thinking before we go.
Thank you. I'll speak very fast, gentlemen and ladies, because 5 minutes isn't long to put the world to rights, is it? We can't really debate an issue like this, the impact of green or anti-carbon policies on the growth of the UK, without understanding something of our current economic position. And as a nation, we've been living above our means for more than a decade now, a decade in which the balance of trade in goods has been in serious deficit and growing worse at the rate of about 20% per annum. The rate of increase of deficit was perturbed briefly by the banking crash, but it actually didn't cure much, and it just improved, increased the debt position. So the imbalance of our trading goods with the rest of the world is now in excess of 100 billion. It was 80 billion in your book, Ewan, and that was only a year or so ago. But it's now 100 billion. More than half of that is due to the deficit on finished manufactured goods. We make a surplus in the trade of services, but not nearly enough to cover the deficit. So the net result has been an overall deficit of the order of 40 billion per annum. To put this into perspective, our defence budget is less than 40 billion per annum. So in our balance of payments, we make up this deficit by a combination of selling debt and assets. The overall debt continues to grow, and with the help of the banking crash, the interest payments are now of the order of 50 billion a year. In terms of asset sales, the bulk of our gold reserves are long gone. Much of UK industry is now foreign-owned and controlled. In the UK, there are only 228 manufacturing companies with more than 1,000 employees. Only 93 of these are UK-owned now, so that's nearly two-thirds foreign ownership. These matters are not unrelated, and one has to understand the precarious position of our economy and its dependence on our industrial capability. This is the point. The figures, besides all else, make the point that this is a very serious issue. Despite manufacturing industry declining to only 11% of the total economy, it still provides half of all our exports, 3/4 of our business R&D, and much of what we have is of excellent quality. It's just that we don't have enough of it to maintain our current standard of living, so something's got to give. Clearly, we need to nurture it and encourage it, and this is a considerable challenge, and one in which the growth of profitable, exportable industrial output has to be given a very high priority. It should be way up the top. So now we come to the issue of CO2 and its role in climate change. It's still a very unsettled science, and I have to say, without nearly enough hard facts to justify the level of alarmism that has prevailed. The too early publicisation and politicisation of the science has led the developed world into some hugely expensive and wasteful diversions, and these are going to become increasingly apparent with time. However, our concern here is with the economy, and particularly the critical role of industry, and there are two main issues to consider. First, do the current carbon-related policies open up a large industrial opportunity for the UK? Well, undoubtedly there will be some, but if we have some exaggerated idea of the industrial value of these opportunities, and particularly whether the UK is well placed to take advantage of them, then I fear we're in for a disappointment. Almost all of the renewable energy sources in wind, wave and solar have to be heavily subsidised, to such an extent that even strong economies like that of Germany or the USA cannot afford to continue and are drawing back as the economic realities come home to roost. Governments change their minds, and in particular, any company venturing into a heavily subsidised business area needs to be very cautious. These businesses bring little overall economic benefit, since they and the whole structure of the energy delivered is littered with subsidies, which in the end has to find its way back to the consumer and the taxpayer. I think, Evan, it's more a toll booth business. Renewables have their many practical disadvantages, not at least of which is the real estate area or the marine area required to produce an equivalent amount of electrical energy, and the difficulties in handling the huge variability and uncertainty of the supply. All of the renewable sources of energy are relatively expensive compared to fossil fuels, and all are going to be severely undercut by the development of shale gas. Shale gas is already transforming the energy prospects of the USA, which has become a net exporter of gas and less dependent upon oil. And the UK has a very substantial untapped shale gas resource, and this could similarly transform the energy future here. So it makes every sense to seek more efficient use of fossil fuels, but technology developments that lead to improved efficiency and cost reduction don't need the heavily subsidised sledgehammer approach that has been implemented in the UK, particularly that due to the 2008 Climate Change Act. We must ask ourselves whether the anti-CO2 policies that are being implemented are damaging to the rest of UK industry, and indeed to the nation as a whole. The 2008 Climate Change Act commits the UK to at least an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And the Blair government introduced this law with enthusiastic support from the various environmental lobbies, but with little forethought as to the impact upon UK industry or the economy at large. Okay, I'll do that. In fact, the CO2 legislation and the subsequent government policies have already impacted severely on energy costs, and the energy-intensive users are suffering. And we must consider a number of obligations that are rising out of this: the renewals obligation, the emission trading system, the climate change levy, and all of these are going to add very substantially to our energy costs. They're crucial, and I think the key thing that we should all take into account is if you really want to save the environment, then you have to save the economy first. Poor nations are unable to save anything, certainly not the environment. So let me suggest that a good place to start and face up to the realities of our economic position, then let's repeal the 2008 Climate Change Act. Even if it made any sense at all in terms of CO2 reduction, which it doesn't, we can't afford it. Thank you.
To summarise your argument, it is a level playing field argument, that there's no point in burdening UK industry with burdens that foreign industries don't have, because there's a leakage if you do that. But you're not saving carbon because you're just importing the goods from...
I think one of the best examples of it was Tata at steel plants in England, Germany, France and the Netherlands. And they did an energy piece of energy research on them. The UK was 50% more expensive than the French and 30% more expensive than everybody else in terms of energy. The differences were all green taxes and the effect of using non-base load electricity. I mean, that's Tata.
Right. And so you're not really gaining anything by...
You're not gaining.
Yeah. Okay, point well made. Right, Jane.
Okay.
Foreign-owned company.
Yes, I'm a foreign-owned company. I thought I'd take a macro problem and bring it down to the micro level. Just to explain, I currently run a power station in the northeast of England. Quite unique. I have 2 coal boilers, 2 gas turbines, and the UK's first commercial biomass boiler in my portfolio. From a power station perspective, I'm very, very small. We're only 267 megawatts, and we're 35 megawatts on the biomass plant. But my prime objective is to provide heat to the chemical industries in the Teesside area. I also provide power, but power really is a byproduct. So I'm slightly different to the normal power station. In fact, my model, or my business model, is actually what the government are trying to promote. So we're a CHP company, a combined heat and power company. We're about 70 to 80% efficient, where the conventional power stations, coal-fired power stations, are in the just below the 40%. Gas-fired power stations these days are around 50% efficiency. So we're a high-efficiency business supplying energy-intensive chemical companies. And our business strategy, I mean, initially we decided we wanted to be first-mover advantage on the biomass boiler. We commissioned it in 2007. I have to say that was probably my worst year commissioning a plant. We were 45% of availability in the first year. By the second year, we're up to 85% availability. So it's not as easy as just turning on a boiler like you do at home. It's quite a difficult process. But also my other assets, the coal boilers, we've got tri-fuel low NOx burners. We had to put low NOx burners in under the Large Combustion Plant Directive. So we can burn heavy fuel oil, gas and coal. We promote fuel flexibility and fuel security to our customers. They are chemical plants, they are coma plants, so therefore they have to have steam and power of very high reliability, and we're 99.77% reliability. I produce power and I spit it to the grid. Our business strategy in 2010 was forced to relook at our business model because a lot of customers were closing down. Croda, Dow, some of the big multinationals and Invista closed down on the Wilton International site within Teesside, and predominantly because they were not competitive. Dow said that the UK business was not competitive. They shut it down, and it had a knock-on effect to our business strategy. We had no more suppliers at the end. We can't find steam customers. Steam customers have to be very close by. You can't export steam very easily. So we then had to put in a condensing turbine to allow us to produce more power. We receive every renewable obligation certificate that you can think of. We receive renewable obligation certificates, levy exemption certificates, renewable levy exemption certificates, and we also trade on carbon emissions on our coal boiler. Just for information, our biomass boiler is classed as carbon neutral. It produces 200,000 tonnes less a year of CO2, which is equivalent to 67,000 cars off the road, just to give you the scale of the difference. Now, I mentioned the Large Combustion Plant Directive. In 2015, a lot of the coal-fired power stations have opted out of the LCPD post-2015, so we are going to see a lot of coal-fired plants starting to shut down. Nuclears are reaching the end of their productive lives. What's going to happen? Today, looking at the carbon market, looking at the price of electricity, it's chaos. We can see 2 years ahead. The electricity price is not going up, which we thought was going up. Government strategies are talking about a carbon floor price. We don't see that in the future power price. Today, looking at my assets, the coal boiler is the cheapest one to operate. That's where I make my most money today. So I'd rather run coal. The next one is gas, and then wood. From a fuel perspective, wood is very expensive, but because of the renewable obligation certificates, it puts it in first order. So today I'd run the biomass boiler, then I'd run coal, and then I'd run gas. In fact, today, and in fact the last 3 months, the gas turbines can be just shut down because every time I operate them, I'm losing money at this moment in time. So my argument really, my discussion at the moment is, for instance, the government in the latest budget said they were going to remove levy exemption certificates. So we're going to take that money away and put it into low carbon economy. You know, what's more low carbon than combined heat and power plants? 2013, they're removing that. For us, that's quite a serious detriment to our business strategy. So what I'm really promoting is, I think the government has to look outside the short term, has to put a 20-year government strategy in. We're looking at energy and we're looking at infrastructure. We can't make decisions every 2 years. Nobody's going to invest. It takes a long-term time to invest, to build a plant, to operate and run it efficiently. So I'm promoting a long-term strategy, cross-political parties, and diversity of the fuel mix. We can't run the country on wind turbines, and we're going to hear a bit more about wind turbines, but if you watch the power market on a daily basis, and you see and you watch the wind over 30 miles an hour, most of the wind turbines are shut down, power price shoots up. You know, we can't run an energy company based on how windy it is out there. We need a mix, and that's really what I'm promoting.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane. When Dow said they were uncompetitive because of energy prices, or they were because of the...
In the Dow family, they were the most uncompetitive. Their product
but it wasn't
was the
labour
most
costs
expensive.
or...
It was a mix of everything. And I think we have to recognise that, labour cost. I mean, today, my labour cost is the biggest part of my fixed cost burden.
But I mean, I'm really trying to get at whether you're bearing out Sir Alan's point that we're driving industry offshore because of the energy cost we're imposing by renewable goals and decarbonising.
I think it's a factor. Yes.
But not the only factor, or the...
No, absolutely.
Right. And you said you'd use the biomass first because of the subsidy you get effectively on the biomass.
Correct.
Coal second.
Yes.
But you also said you make most of your money from the coal one.
Yes. Because interesting enough on the biomass, when we first commissioned the biomass plant, it was there to produce power. And then the government changed its strategy and said they wanted combined heat and power. So we put in basically a heat exchanger at the flue to allow us to get more renewable obligation certificates. So again, the government has changed their mind every other year, so we adopt our operation to suit and maximise.
But your talk is a talk pleading for policy stability.
Correct.
Right. Right. Gareth, you have looked at policy quite a lot, in fact, probably more than anyone else on the panel here. So why don't you take us through your report, and in particular with regard to energy-intensive industries, which are the ones that we've heard most about, Sir Alan was most concerned about.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And it's interesting, when we're thinking about energy-intensive industries, we might have a particular view about them and how energy-intensive industries think about greening our economy. And I think that view might not be the reality of really where we are. Because greening our energy supply can and should be compatible with growth if it's done correctly. And I mean then, i.e. affordably. Energy-intensive industries have a vested interest that we achieve our goals at least cost and most benefit to the UK and really the EU economy. But I'd like to clear a few things up first in the sense of, one, we need to understand what the low-carbon sector is. What are all these low-carbon sectors? Well, to my mind, they're the traditional sectors. What is a low-carbon supply chain? Well, again, to my mind, it looks very similar to a traditional supply chain. We also must remember that high-carbon components sit inside low-carbon products. And therefore, my first message really is that energy-intensive industries are vital to low-carbon growth here in the UK going forward. But two, that energy-intensive industries are committed to and are taking action. If we look at government figures over the last 20 years, industry has reduced emissions by nearly 40%, whilst the production has stayed about the same. Whereas if we think about the residential sector, their emissions have gone up over that time. So the current policy landscape aims to increase costs through a carbon price to subsidise or de-risk investment in renewables, for example, making emitting carbon more expensive. But what does this do to globally competitive sectors, such as steel, cement or aluminium? We must bear in mind that these sectors have their price set globally. They're often sectors, and particularly the steel sector, that has very, very limited abatement opportunities using the current technology that they're working within. Well, what happens? Well, they become globally less competitive. And we must bear in mind that the companies based here, the energy-intensive companies based here in the UK, are often actually much more efficient here than their global competitors elsewhere that are not regulated in the same way we are. So if we see these sectors moving offshore, well, what does that do? Well, to my mind, it increases global emissions. And actually, probably more importantly for the debate here, it disrupts the low-carbon supply chain going forward in terms of the UK. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that we should forget about our Climate Change Act targets. I'm not saying that globally exposed sectors should be let off the hook at all. I'm saying that we need to accept that we need different approaches for different sectors. But that is to achieve our common goal. And what's our common goal? Well, it's to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. That's what our common goal is. But in terms of the energy supply and the UK economy as a whole, the UK must set itself on a road to affordable decarbonisation. No successful business has a long-term plan that isn't affordable or sustainable. So why should government policy adopt such a plan? We currently have a crowded, complex and costly policy landscape, one that cannot decide if it wants to decarbonise or actually just increase government income. You can easily create this market that we're talking about. You can increase the price of carbon, you can regulate, you can set standards. But the most difficult part of this is ensuring that the home market here, be it the UK or even the EU, can feed and benefit from that marketplace. So finally, the answer, I think, for most globally competitive sectors are challenging global sector agreements that put all players on a level playing field within that sector. But the most important thing here, that find ways to unlock the barriers to change in the technology that we currently use. And no one region of the world can do that on their own. We need a global agreement within those sectors to make that a reality. And we need government. We can't do it on our own. We need government to work with us to make that happen.
Thank you very much. Gareth, you very, very articulately put forward the case for levelling the playing field for these high energy-intensive industries. What do we do in the absence of these global agreements for those industries? Which I think is really Sir Alan's problem. Let's suppose the Chinese don't agree, or the other countries don't agree, or we spend the next 10 years discussing it and thinking about it, then what do you suggest we do?
Well, we do what we're doing now, which is fudging it. We create the EU emissions trading scheme, and we then have certain allowances, and we give free allowances to energy-intensive industries, but it doesn't actually achieve our goal. So we need to be honest with ourselves and say the EU emissions trading scheme does nothing to reduce global emissions from the steel sector. So why are we doing what we're doing?
Right.
And so you say, is there another solution? I don't think there is. We have to work with the Chinese government, for example, to say, come on, we need to bring the steel sector into a global agreement. There are developed sectors in developing economies.
So what I'm trying to work out is whether fundamentally, in the absence of a first best world, you actually are agreeing with Sir Alan. In the absence of that global agreement, you're more or less saying we shouldn't burden our energy-intensive industries with stuff that other countries are not burdening theirs with.
I'm saying what we shouldn't do is shut down our industries and achieve nothing.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, you're agreeing with him on that. You're disagreeing with him on that. You would put more emphasis on trying to do something with these other countries, whereas Sir Alan is probably less enthusiastic.
Because there's such a
I don't think you gave me a chance to comment on that one.
No. Well, you can come back after. I just want to sort of sort out where everybody's coming from. Okay. No, I think we're getting the picture. I mean, so far we've been talking about traditional industries that are not, they're just traditional industries, and the impact of green measures on them as we try and green them. But there are other things that go on in greening the economy, which is thinking of new industries that might be industries about greening stuff. I mean, maybe that's where Siemens come in.
Yeah, sure. And in terms of the question that was posed, I think from a Siemens point of view, I'm going to firmly come down on the side of that this is a massive business opportunity. And just to put a few facts and observations behind that. So first of all, our global revenue in Siemens is about 80 billion euros. And we spent quite a lot of time also having externally verified how much of those products are products or technology or solutions that help customers reduce their energy bills, or in other words, to improve the carbon footprint. And we have an audited revenue of 30 billion of the 80 billion in that sort of technology portfolio that helps reduce carbon emissions. And as a matter of fact, there was an audited figure that 30 billion last year in 2011 helped save 317 million tonnes of CO2 globally. That figure of 30 billion grew from 20 billion 3 years ago, and we have a goal to grow the current 30 billion to 40 billion over the next 2 years. So clearly items of environmental portfolio for us are a huge growth opportunity. To put a few specifics on it, more close to home, here in the UK, we are growing very nicely in the offshore sector that Alan has commented on. That's both in installing offshore wind farms and all of the technology regarding the grid connection, so getting the electricity back on shore, a very significant opportunity for us. I don't share the view of Alan that this is a totally subsidised industry and should be scrapped because it's unaffordable. And I say that not just because we're a provider of offshore. Please remember that we also provide technology for coal-fired power station, nuclear-powered fire station, biomass power station. So we have an interest in all of those economies, and we actually think that the answer has got to be a balance of all of those. We've also done our homework, and we are absolutely certain that within 5 years' time, with enough investment in R&D, we can get the price of offshore wind down to the equivalent cost of coal and gas-fired power stations, on the basis that, of course, coal and gas prices, especially gas, is rising, and with innovation we can actually get wind turbine technology down. It does require a lot of upfront subsidies, without a question. My view is that the nations that invest in that upfront are the clever ones, because they will be the people that benefit from all of the job creation and value creation that it generates in your country, which clearly is what it's doing for the United Kingdom as we're investing in it, and indeed we need to invest more. However, we're also doing a lot of stuff around greening manufacturing, technology for improving the energy efficiency of manufacturing, making buildings like this greener. We have a lot of technology, and we have a lot of technology around transport, simple things like the technology to make buses, hybrid buses, as opposed to just diesel buses. We can help with technology, and indeed are doing here in the United Kingdom. All growth areas for us. In terms of our own manufacturing footprint here in the UK, we have about 13,000 people here in the UK. 5,000 of those are directly involved in manufacturing plants. 13 of them here in the UK. That's 4% of our global manufacturing footprint. Doesn't sound very much, but the UK, as a total economy, has about 2.5% of the global manufacturing footprint. So actually we do our fair share of manufacturing here. And the good news is we're investing in more. For example, we are going to build an offshore wind manufacturing facility in Hull, well publicised in the press, and that will be up and running by the back end of 2013. Energy costs are definitely not going to be the barrier to us investing here in the UK. Two reasons for that. We don't actually see the UK as uncompetitive on energy prices. I don't know where your statistic came from. I'm sure it's correct. For energy-intensive industries like Tata Steel, for the average of industrial users, gas prices in the UK are the most competitive in Europe. Statistics from Eurostat 2011, and on electricity prices we're about mid-table of 15 countries in Europe, so we're definitely not the most expensive. And actually the right thing to do is to make your manufacturing more energy efficient anyway, so that you rely less, or you actually spend less on energy costs. So for us it's not really energy prices, it's much more other things like, is there a local market? Is there support for R&D? Are the skills available? Which to us are much more important things. Just briefly on policy, my view is we need policy, very clearly. As a matter of fact, without policy, I'm pretty sure we'd be doing even less to green some of our installed infrastructure. I'm talking about manufacturing and buildings, and from my experience of working for Siemens in Germany, Austria and the UK, I can tell you that we're way behind in terms of our appetite to invest to actually make our manufacturing industries greener and more efficient, quite simply because we've got still too much old technology which we're sweating the assets rather than putting in new stuff which is energy efficient, which of course some of the policy measures are designed to incentivise. The problem, however, we have with policy is that we love dabbling, and we just keep changing things around, and it's not stable, and industry hates that. We like to know where we're going, we like to know where the future is, and we're a dabbling nation on policy, and things like CRCs, the enhanced capital allowances, feed-in tariffs and things, all been dabbled with over the last 2 years, and they make it very difficult in terms of companies like ours to really set out the stall for the future in some of those areas, and I'm sure we'll come back to debate some more of those.
Jürgen, thank you very much indeed. That was quite positive. There is this very strange phenomenon. Sometimes you can put a burden on an industry, and instead of it acting like a burden, it actually makes them raise their game in a way that is dynamic. So I was talking to a very good civil engineer who said, don't believe people saying health and safety is causing construction prices to be high, because the ones who are safe are actually just more efficient because they know what they're doing. And I wonder whether that is true of greening manufacturing, that that there's a sort of behavioural effect. You sort of shove a burden on them, they grumble, they work something out, and then they're better at everything they do thereafter.
No, absolutely. I do understand that there is a burden, especially on energy-intensive industries. But I visit some of those energy-intensive industries here in the UK, and I wouldn't want to name any. But I can tell you that there is technology in there. Things as basic as the good old induction motor, which actually consumes about 60% of the whole of industrial energy here in the UK. And some of those motors were built 30 years ago. And are just outdated, and you could replace it with a new one with a payback of less than 2 years. But we just don't tend to do it as fast in this country as we do in the equivalent German, French, Italian and Spanish countries. So we don't do enough to help ourselves.
Well, that's a very important point. Good. Well, look, we've had a sort of an initial chat. I am going to come out to the audience, and I've got a few questions here that were submitted beforehand. We will interact. I just want to essentially sum up on the issue of, if we've got to rebalance the economy, and everybody seems to agree, we've got to build more export industries, which means more manufacturing industries, some of which will be quite heavy industries probably, and which will be quite energy intensive. Focusing on that sector, do we more or less agree with the proposition set out by Sir Alan that we are in the danger of, to what extent do we agree that we're in danger of of impeding our recovery and our rebalancing by the attempt to green? That there is a conflict between greening and rebalancing our economy. Sir Alan, have you been convinced by anything you've heard to change your view?
Well, it isn't a matter of changing my view. I don't knock Siemens. If I was managing director of Siemens, I'd do exactly what Siemens do. I mean, they're a good engineering company, and they see opportunities and they go for them. If you took the subsidies away, though, I don't think they'd see the same opportunities, frankly. But that's not knocking wind power. I don't believe that there should be no wind power. I do believe that it's a nonsense to think that you're going to provide baseload electricity from wind power. We had a lecture it was held at the Royal Society last week, in which a chief executive of RWE, who had been responsible for their wind power programme, 1.6 billion euro programme, and he had become very disenchanted. And he said, he gave an example. He said, not only does when you need it, the wind doesn't blow, but when it does blow and you don't need it, you've got a problem. You've got all this electricity you've got to get out of the grid somehow. So they go to the Dutch and they say, would you take this electricity? And the Dutch say, no thanks, we don't want it. And they say, well, look, we'll pay you to take it. And they say, all right then, it's $100 million euros a year. So the Germans pay the Dutch to take their surplus electricity to try and smooth out the bumps. I mean, if you look at it as just any engineer looking at it, surely any engineer looking at a base load supply would not think of going to something as variable as wind. That just seems common sense to me without getting into any numbers.
Well, I mean, quite a number of those challenges that you just laid out, are resolvable through technology, such as, the balancing of the load, and do we sell and buy from the Netherlands? And there's already the vision of actually connecting the whole of Northwest Europe through a much more intelligent grid, so that when the wind isn't blowing off the east coast of England, it's growing somewhere else. Now, the point I'm going to come to is that the question that we've got to answer: do we in the UK want to be in that game of investing in that R&D? So yes, we're putting the subsidies in, but we're also putting the R&D in, which means that actually we end up with the technology companies, we end up with the supply chain here in the UK, creating thousands of jobs because we've created that technology here. We can export that technology around the world because we're the world experts at it here. Or do we say, oh, well, it's just going to be a little bit on the sidelines, but we'll have a bit of it, and actually we'll just buy it all in from Denmark and Germany, as actually we've started doing, and we're only just beginning to put more of it in the UK. And I say, be bold, invest in the R&D and the technology, be the leader, and actually create real value for the British economy in the supply chain, and then do the calculation again in terms of has it paid for itself, in terms of all of the jobs and all of the industry we've created for an export market.
I wouldn't knock anybody that can make something and sell it. I really wouldn't want to knock anything, and certainly I don't want to stop Siemens. Having their research probably done in Munich, by the way, and just assembling things here. But fine, that's business. But I would say for a nation to have a policy like ours, which actually drives such industry as we have out of business when we're so critically poised. I mean, I'll give you an example which I did a bit of research on recently. We used to have 3 aluminium smelters in the UK, large plants, surrounded by their various supply industries. 2 of them have been closed down by their owners. Okay, they've been closed down because of the cost of electricity in the UK. There's 1 left now in Scotland. Now, there's also similar stories in bulk chemicals. The same sort of thing. It may not be the only factor, but it's certainly a factor. And when you've got a very difficult situation we have here, why make it more difficult?
We don't want to lose these industries. Clearly, this is all part of the... Okay, I want Gareth and Jane to give a quick comment and just arbitrate on this discussion. And then we'll move on to where the British can get a comparative advantage in new green industries.
I mean, no one's going to knock Jürgen to build, manufacture and develop jobs in the UK. No problem. The one thing you said earlier, you said that we had cheap gas in Europe compared to the rest of Europe, but then you said we were 15th in the table for electricity. 7th, sorry.
7 out of 15.
7 out of 15. So that means my gas is cheap, but I don't get much revenue from my power. So therefore I don't make money. So I can build these power plants, but as an operator I need to make money.
But hang on, it can't both be bad for the customers and for the providers. I mean, either you're not making money and they're getting it cheap, or they're not getting it cheap and you are making money.
They're not getting it cheap.
They're not getting it cheap?
No.
And why aren't you making money?
Why aren't you making money?
Why aren't you making enough?
Because power price.
Because the energy in cost.
Because the in cost is high. Okay. Gareth, final word on these domestic industries, heavy users, how we rebalance.
Yeah, I mean, I could say again and again, you almost paint it as, do we want to be part of the climate change solution or do we want out? And it's not that. It's that these sectors, as I said, are vital. And actually, we've got enormous opportunity here to cut down carbon emissions from these highly carbon sectors. But the government policy at the moment does the opposite to that. And I think government failing to understand how businesses are run. So they fail to understand that in the steel sector, from now to, say, to 2050, there's probably only 1 or 2 investment cycles occurring in that sector. Government policy doesn't reflect that at all. And in terms of energy prices, it's a fact that German energy prices for energy-intensive industries after rebates and tax and all of that are 10% higher in Germany than they are here.
Oh, goodness, so we really are arguing over the German energy prices are higher than here.
Yep.
And that's after the complexity of all of this.
But why then are we losing these companies as we've been hearing? I mean,
Sorry, I've got it wrong. We're at 10%
So we're 10%
Sorry,
higher. Sorry, okay, sorry.
Crucial point.
That is a crucial
We're
point.
10%
good.
higher than
So
they
we
are in
are
Germany.
establishing, we're getting to the fact, we're more expensive.
Well, I don't share that. I mean, it might be for specific
That's
energy-intensive
That's the point.
As
That's
an
the point.
average
Yeah.
across industrial users, energy prices in Germany are considerably higher than they are
And it's
in
certainly
the
the case
UK.
for retail customers that we're considered cheap. But I think for these heavy industries,
But that's the point I want to make, Evan, in the sense that it's easy to say, it's all complex, and that's the problem. I think government policy isn't reflecting that fact. I agree with Jürgen in terms of the middle level people, and then I agree with myself in terms of the energy intensive.
Right.
And it's a different picture,
Yeah,
and we need
okay.
to understand that in order to make the right policies to get the change that we want.
so it's essentially we need a policy for the energy intensive and we need a policy for everyone else, which might be slightly different policy. Okay, that's enough on the, if you like, the bit of the economy that we need to build up, which is not devoted to being green, but is perhaps incidentally or not incidentally green itself. So that's industry. The second interesting thing is about greening the economy is really what Jürgen was talking about, which is we have an opportunity here to build new industries, that the rebalancing of our economy can be to build an industry that does green stuff and then sells it to the rest of the world. Here's your starter for 10. Where does the UK comparative advantage in these industries lie? Because every country in the world says, why don't we build green industries and then export our technology to the rest of the world? We can't all do that. It's not going to work if we all try and do that. So every country has to say, where do we have, when it comes to new green industries, where do we have a comparative advantage? Where can we do stuff and sell it and be competitive? And I'd like you each, if you would, starting with you, Jürgen, to reflect on where the UK has a comparative advantage. And don't just say, well, let's do all of the green stuff, because that's not going to make sense.
No, and I mean, to answer your question, if you would have asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have said, look, we just don't have the vision and the strategy to do this. However, I think we're improving, and certainly, I started work with the previous government on what should our manufacturing strategy be, and I'm currently working with, there is a new manufacturing strategy looking out to 2050 under Vince Cable, which I'm part of the steering team of that group, and I think we're starting to get it, which is that actually we need to do exactly what you've just said, Evan. We need to pick certain areas, and this is not picking winners, so this is not picking British Leyland or DeLorean cars. This is picking certain sectors, some of which will be low carbon sectors, such as offshore wind, sorry to bring it back again, but others might be electric car infrastructure or electric cars, which actually I think we're beginning to be pretty good at, and then say, let's really start taking those seriously. Let's really start ploughing money into R&D, because that's the differentiator. The differentiator on the global stage is innovation and R&D, and the rest follows in behind, and that is that you get companies collaborating together with universities, creating the intellectual property for products, technology, which can deliver solutions ultimately and export them around the world. And I think we've got to focus, and the answer is I think we are capable, because we have got a very highly innovative capability here in the UK.
We're good at innovation generally. But when you said electric cars there, were you just saying that by way of an example, or do you actually think that is something the UK has?
No, I actually think, well, we've already started it, so, we've got actually both from the in-car technology. We've obviously got companies like Nissan, but also Jaguar Land Rover putting a lot of into that, but it's also around the electric car infrastructure,
right.
The actual charging infrastructure, going all the way into the whole smart grid activity, etc., and those sorts of areas I think we can be quite leading on. And there is, by the way, just to say, there is being stuff specifically being done, like these catapults, which some of you will have heard about. So these are specific research institutes, idea pinched a little bit from Germany, which I think is great, because actually our catapults here are going to be better than the equivalent in Germany, more flexible, and those are exactly the sorts of vehicles that will drive that innovation and value add in the UK.
Okay.
I think you're right. I think governments are starting to get it, but we're certainly not there yet. I think the problem is, and Jane mentioned it earlier, when we talk the word certainty, what we need to put in front of that is investment certainty. We can have certainty of high costs, but that doesn't mean we're going to invest here.
What areas, though? What are the things that you think the UK, what are the industries you think we might be good at in the so-called green space?
Well, I don't think the UK is the place to invest at the moment in those areas, in the sense that we've created that market, as I said in my talk, we've created that market, but others can feed that. So if you're in the US, you don't have the carbon price. You can feed this market.
You don't think there are any green industries in which the UK has a competitive, any new green industries in which the UK has a competitive, I mean, no carbon capture, electric cars, offshore wind,
I think we have the
smart grids, smart meters. I mean, there are loads and loads of these industries, and you're saying not in a single one does the UK have a future.
I think we have the opportunity to be world leaders. We probably have missed the boat in offshore wind. I think we probably have the opportunity to be world leaders in tidal and wave, and potentially even carbon capture and storage. But the government need to kind of get moving with this.
Down to government. Jane.
I actually think our biggest export ability is our people. I think we have an adaptable workforce who know how to make manufacturing plants efficient and run efficiently. And I think, and I struggle a little bit, I think we're very good at innovation. We're rubbish at taking the idea and putting it to market. Absolutely terrible. And I think we've missed a load of opportunities. I think we're talking about carbon capture storage. When's it going to happen? When are we going to see it? When's it going to be adopted? We're slow. We're too slow getting ideas to market. So I think at the moment, I actually don't think we are, or we have anything that is sort of first mover advantage. I agree. I think, wind, we're copying the European model. There's nothing wrong with that, and if we can manufacture it and export it, great. But I actually think we don't have, and I think it's a sad indictment, actually.
That's a very sad indictment. I'm absolutely shocked, actually. I'm shocked, genuinely.
Well, I think it's called reality rather than shock, The truth of the matter is that we need to manufacture things. We need to manufacture, we need to export or to replace imports. To start saying it's got to be green.
No, it doesn't have to be. It's just a question. Do we have a comparative advantage in any of those green industries?
We don't have any particular advantage. You might find some individual somewhere or some small company somewhere that's got some good thing. But it could be green or it could be anything else. The point is it doesn't have to be green. And,
it doesn't.
And telling people to try to direct what talents you have into green industries, I think, is a big mistake. Because the chances are, as soon as the subsidies are pulled, the industry will go flop. They would have been much better taking different routes. If you left it to the entrepreneurs to decide what they wanted to do, they might surprise you. I mean, I think one of the examples that is much used at the moment is Brompton Cycles. I mean, where on earth would anybody have invested in a bicycle manufacturer, a small bicycle manufacturer, when we'd just seen Raleigh with an output of something like 250,000 bikes a year just to the US alone go bust? Who would have backed a bicycle maker that wanted to make all the bits himself because none of them were standard? Well, you wouldn't, and probably I wouldn't, but he made a success of it. And now Brompton have got a 30 million pound business. They sell 30,000 bikes internationally around the world, and they have a huge following for those bicycles. The point is, you and I sitting around here are not going to come up with this great idea. And thinking you can pick a sector like green because somebody in government says it so, that is something...
No, but you've misunderstood the question. The question wasn't should the government pick as the winner. The question was are there any of these industries? And I'm very surprised, given that we have what is generally regarded as the best university sector in Europe, more or less. Generally regarded, I think, as the best university sector. I'm genuinely surprised in a huge swathe of new industries. None of you think we have, apart from Jürgen, think we have any place at all?
Look, we have about 36,000 small and medium-sized companies out there, and I'm sure some of them are doing clever little things, but the scale of them is such that most of the people in this room wouldn't know about them unless they had some particular reason.
No, look, we've got lots of good business. Don't get me wrong. I'm an optimist about our productive capacity. I'm just surprised that in this huge, great, newish, growing sort of field of economic development, we don't appear to be a player at all.
Evan, though, you just said they don't have any place at all, but your question was the advantage of the UK over other countries. That's
well, comparative
I
advantage.
didn't say it didn't have any place. I said if you're a global company, like Rolls-Royce, do you say you can invest anywhere? Do you say we're going to invest in the UK, or do you invest your R&D facilities somewhere else? That's the choice they're making at the moment. And I don't think they look at the moment favourably at the UK when they've
they've just made the decision to move all their marine activity to Singapore. So R&D, manufacture, marketing, everything.
Well, I mean, global companies make these decisions, but at the same time, Rolls-Royce are the absolute backer of the advanced manufacturing catapult centres, and have said that they're going to do all their world research on manufacturing in those catapults here in the UK. If I can give you just another example, we in Manchester have just invested in a brand new building where we are going to do all of the R&D for all offshore grid connection, HVDC, if that means anything to anybody, low losses on transmission technology here in Manchester, and we're recruiting 400 people to do that right now. And sitting behind that technology will be a huge amount of smaller SME companies who will benefit, who will be in our supply chain, who will benefit from all of that market. And I just think we have got to be bolder in terms of setting out that we want to be leaders worldwide in some of these areas, and therefore also capture export opportunities to make that growth even bigger than just a UK opportunity. And maybe the problem is, and I'm going to provoke a little bit, that actually it seems to be more foreign-owned companies which are actually driving the British policy in that way. So your point about, we don't have enough British owned, actually it's companies like Siemens, Tata, like Nissan, like Toyota, who are actually driving this stuff here in the UK. And I just wish that we had a bit more boldness from some of our UK counterparts to say, let's really make the UK a world innovative place in some of these areas. And I'm absolutely sure we can, because countries around the world are showing us that it can be done. Denmark decided they were going to go for offshore wind in a big way. Their whole economy is booming on the back of just the export market from that. They're doing extremely well on it. They are. And so is the north of Germany.
Right.
That's not what we hear.
I think we should open it up to the floor here. Show your hand. We've got a glamorous assistant with a microphone. I'm going to take this chap in the aisle here. If you run down over here, he's the one with the glasses, waving his hand. He's been catching my eye for the last 10 minutes. Yes, go ahead. Tell us who you are as well.
Thank you very much, Evan, and thank you to the panel for their contributions. I'm Andrew Smith from UCL Energy Institute. So first of all, let me endorse the comments about the superior quality of the UK academic sector. Part of my role at the UCL Energy Institute, one of the UK's excellent universities, is looking at the comparative advantage of the UK in green business and the energy sector in particular. Of course, UK oil and gas only got going because of £40 billion of government money in the late 60s and early 70s. So I think we should look at nurturing our infant industries. When I look at where our comparative advantage is, I don't want to do what we did with radar and IT at the end of World War II, which was innovate everything and manufacture nothing. But we are the 7th biggest manufacturing country in the world, so we are quite good at manufacturing. I'm a proud owner of a Brompton, by the way. I agree with everything you said about the marvellous quality of the Brompton bike.
I'm going to have to rush you a little bit.
My summary is, when we look at where are the advantages in developing new technologies, if you have a lot of a resource, it's more economic for you to develop technology in that resource. Which country has the best offshore wind resource in the world? That happens to be the UK. We're also the biggest deployer of offshore wind in the world. We are number one in offshore wind deployment in the world. We have a world leadership there. We have a world leadership in developing climate change policy. We have a world leading resource in wave, and we have the best world resource in tidal stream and in tidal range.
And okay, you've got 10 seconds now. Sorry.
So that's where our comparative advantage is. Our resources are there. Wave, wind, tidal stream, tidal range, manufacturing, and academia. That's where our comparative advantage is. If we're serious about UK PLC, that's where we invest.
Right. Okay, I'm going to take a few more. Anyone on the subject of comparative advantage, competitive advantage of the UK in green industries, or let's get a couple of contributions on that, and then we'll move on to a more random question. Yeah, so just on the subject of competitive and comparative advantage of the UK. You've got the gentleman in the second row here, then the one, two along. We'll take it. Then the other one, yeah. Go ahead.
My turn? Okay, Gary Hayes, HGen. Our real advantage, you're drinking it, it's water. We've got lots of it around the place. So you can make hydrogen until the cows come home, store it, and then you balance your energy system. Everything comes from hydrogen. It's the basis of all our elements. Why don't we look there?
Right. Pass it along to the gentleman two along.
Fuel cells as well.
Just across the aisle. That's it. Yeah, sir. Yes, go ahead.
Kelly, University of Cambridge. I was in Denmark last week at the Danish National Wind Power Centre. And of course, as you just said, completely wrongly, the cost of electricity in Denmark is precisely twice what it is in the UK for a private user, and it is 70% higher for industry in Denmark compared. Well, so one is a factor 2, and the other is a factor of 1.7. So you're quite wrong when you say that energy is cheaper in Denmark. I want to make one further point. As the first speaker said, and the second speaker followed very well, the third speaker took it upon himself to say that we must all be contributing to a general reduction in greenhouse gases in the world. That is completely out of date. It is clear that what global warming there is not only due to carbon dioxide, it is also due to the solar effects and to pay attention too much to carbon dioxide is going to be ruinous not only for us but for the world.
Right, okay, I don't want us to get too bogged down in the science of climate change. There's a guy on the left-hand side there, yeah, and then the one in the aisle, yeah, and then I just want to take a few.
Thank you. Alex Quayle, BP. I just want to emphasise I speak in a private capacity.
Yeah.
I'd like to make the observation that it's very difficult for us to compete in the kind of industries that we're worried about losing. And it's going to be difficult, although the sort of topics that I understand we're talking about here. Energy-intensive industries, cement, what were the other ones that were mentioned? These steel production and so on.
Aluminium smelting, chemicals, all those things, yeah.
There are big hydro dams in the world that can do aluminium smelting. There are cheap workforces that can slash our labour costs in terms of raw materials. We're just not going to compete there. Globally, energy prices are not going to go through the floor. They're going up. There's more and more people moving into cities. There's more demand for energy. Globally, there is a trend upwards, and it would be very hard to deny that. Where can we compete? I live in Cambridge, and in Cambridge, the economy is positively booming. I'm trying to buy a house at the moment, and it's not easy. It is absolutely booming with the kind of new technology, small businesses, small enterprises, exactly as Jürgen mentioned. The sort of companies that are going to push UK manufacturing, UK technology experts, and UK innovation out there and for the world to buy. And I'd just like to draw one parallel.
Sorry, any of those green companies, are they all companies? They're just companies making random products, or are they?
They're a mix, but certainly the green sector is firmly in there.
Okay.
But I'd like to
just
make
very
one
briefly, really quickly.
Really quick observation. I'd like to draw a parallel when we're concerned about losing industries. I'd like to draw a parallel with the US motor industry, which resisted for so many years the reduction or the increase in miles per gallon as a mandatory limit for vehicles. It was something like 21 miles per US gallon until about 2007, 2008, something like that. The industry has imploded, they've all gone bust, and they're buying cars from the Japanese at a rate of knots. So, do we want to put ourselves in that position by trying to protect these sacred cows that long ago left the field?
We've got to We're going to take a few more and then we get the panel to comment. We've got the gentleman in the white shirt on the aisle on this side, and then we've got one in the second row here, and then we'll take the guy at the back, yeah.
I'm Professor James Woodhousen from De Montfort University. Thank you, Evan. I wonder if the panel could, thinking of competitive advantage, address two issues very kindly. Where I come from, unless the current depression really spills much worse, we are going to maintain enough demand for power to make it quite possible that the lights go out. So if you're talking about competitive advantage, the ability to hold meetings like this or power your laboratories seems to me fairly important, and therefore should the accent not be on growing capacity of any sort.
That's number one. Yeah, number
and the second one is, thank you, is if you want competitive advantage, seems to me that job creation is not going to be part of that. If we want better energy and cheaper energy, it's going to be based on fewer jobs, not more jobs, because that's what productivity and lower prices sadly means.
Okay, thank you for that. Then we're going to take this gentleman here, then the guy in pink at the back, and then I'm going to get some comments from the floor. Getting a lot of points here. You're going to answer or comment on any you like. Yep.
Hello, it's Michael Brooks. I work for myself. I'm a chemical engineer. I run a 4 kilowatt power station in Kent, PV panels on my roof. My father was born in 1894.
Heavily subsidised as well. Yeah.
My father was born in 1894, so I'm 65, so we've got quite a span. When he was born, there wasn't one car in this country, and the first ones that came along were electric. There are now 800 million in the world. Now, that is just not sustainable. And I read the other day that I think the EIA said that we produced 38 billion tonnes of CO2. I think your figure was at 1,000th of that you just mentioned.
Is this a contribution on the need, the imperative of doing something about carbon dioxide? Yeah, move on. Yeah, yeah.
I worked in uranium mining in Namibia some 35 years ago. We were producing about 5,000 tonnes of uranium oxide. It was being sent back to the UK. I recently found out that the power stations have been wasting 99% of the energy that they could have recovered from that fuel, and it is now all stored in Cumbria and elsewhere. Why don't we push hard to build full generation nuclear power stations that would take all this nuclear waste and produce power, enough power that we would need for this country, and we could sell it to the world? That's one issue. Then the next one is
very briefly, because
solar power in the deserts. It is so logical that we have solar power in the deserts because we can then connect your high voltage DC cables, 3% loss, 1,000 kilometres, and it will give those countries something to sell us when we stop taking their oil.
Very good. And then we just last contribution. There was a guy right at the back on the right-hand side, just so we get one from the back as well, and then we'll start. These are all interesting points.
Hello, Sam from the Institution of Civil Engineers. Basically, my question's a policy-based question. I work in policy. Basically, first of all, I'd like to emphasise the point that surely the UK economy is based on intellectual kind of skills and ability. We can't compete on that mass-scale production of China and India. You talked about the smelting industry, so Alan and things like that, but surely that's kind of gone. We can't bring that back, and surely we need to look to the future. But in terms of leadership in these new green technologies, do we need more? We need more kind of policy direction from government in terms of investing in these new R&D projects. Basically, for example, we're a world leader in tunnelling at the moment in terms of cross-rail and things like that. So, and the hope is that those kind of skills can be exported abroad because there's academies going on to basically, hone those skills, and can that be a new export in terms of skills?
Yeah. Okay. Take the point, and then we'll take one last one. The gentleman right down here in the second row, third row here, just caught my eye. He's just coming down behind you. He's behind you, as they say. Yeah.
Chairman, I don't want to pull you too far off the discussion you're having, but let us remind ourselves that the actual title of this evening is Greening UK Energy. Secondly, to say very simply, I do actually believe that we need to ensure that our energy is cheap as we can possibly make it, consistent obviously with what agreements we may have on greening, but we need that in order to be able to create a successful economy. Can I also remind ourselves that sitting in this room, we already know from the government that we're expecting to spend £200 billion in this country in the electricity and energy sector by the year 2020, and that covers a vast range of things from generation to metering and so on and so forth. And I do actually believe that in some way we ought to bear in mind that this Academy should be making a major contribution now, in my view, to the way in which the government is about to dictate the way in which it goes forward. I use the word dictate because I do not believe the industry is capable of making its own choices. It's about whether it goes for wind, for nuclear, and so on and so forth. And the consultation document is out there. And there's room actually in this Academy to actually put forward some kind of advice about how those industries are actually chosen. A different point, but very much part of this paper.
Very good point, and a point for the Academy to take on board.
By the way,
I have Greening the Economy as the title of this event. As a matter of fact, I've got Greening the Economy event. I've got it on my email here.
Damn it, we came to the wrong place.
It is interesting. That might account for some of it. Right, a lot there. First off, interesting proposition raised more than once. Do we write off these big heavy industries and say these are no longer industries that the UK should be engaging in, because even if the energy wasn't expensive, the labour is expensive and they're better placed near hydro plants, so aluminium smelting has no future here? Could you buy that?
Yeah, all right. Well, first of all, I think that we should be worried about stimulating industry of all sorts. And for us to take actual artificial steps to kill off, be it smelting, be it chemical, or be it computer centres, very large computer centres use a lot of energy, burn up a lot of energy, so maybe we should kill them off too. Because after all, we don't care about these old industries. I think we're getting ourselves into a kind of mental trap here. We need to encourage all kinds of industry, whatever we can. We don't want to make laws and rules which artificially remove them. If they're going to die, if they can't compete, let them die. But if we're going to artificially do that, then that's madness, sheer madness. So let me just say that, first of all, we need cheap energy. To take David Jeffries' point, we need cheap energy because it underpins the costs of everything else. Don't use labour as an excuse, because in many modern industries you don't have much labour.
You've answered my question, though. You've answered. Jane, do you think those industries do not have a role in the UK anymore, or a much smaller role, or do you think we can plausibly get some back? And then these are your customers, basically, aren't they?
Well, my background's steel, so I'm British Steel for a long, long time. So for me, yes, we do need these industries. However, they will be producing high-end products, not the large volume. We can't compete with China. We can't compete with India. In fact, many, many years ago, I trained the Indians in how to become an iron maker and how to become a steel maker. We did it to ourselves. So we can only differentiate by high-end products, in my opinion.
So it's steel, but not as we used to make, and it's aluminium, but it's not as we used to make. Gareth, on that specific issue of these industries, you're not willing to write them off yet?
I might be surprising here that if they don't have a role to play in our economy, then let's be honest about that. And I think that, the government's saying what we want is decarbonisation, not deindustrialisation. If they don't believe the steel sector has a part to play, then they need to be honest with us, and then that's where we are. But telling us that they want us here, but then putting one arm behind our backs because they're artificially increasing our costs, doesn't really help. We need one way or the other.
I want to leave that issue. We've been through it quite a bit now. Quite a few questions related to electricity. Capacity. We have one or two ideas for increasing capacity, importing through smart, efficient grids to transmission to get it here. Jürgen, give us the lowdown on UK electricity capacity and where we go.
Well, as I've already said, I think it needs to be a clever mix of all of it. I think the comments about nuclear were very relevant. I think we need to accelerate. I think we're not moving fast enough on that. It's definitely part of the mix. I do agree with the gentleman who said that we have a big capability and possibility in especially tidal, probably less so wave power here in the UK.
What is happening on tidal? Is anything happening?
Yeah,
I mean, is it going anywhere?
Yes, there is, as a matter of fact. I think there's about 80 companies in the UK that are currently ploughing R&D into this area. We've taken a stake in a few of them. Have just bought one of the most leading companies called Marine Current Turbines, based in Bristol, who have got technology up and running and working and started to put electricity back into the grid. The predictions are that up to about 10% of our UK energy could ultimately come from that. And I think it's one of those areas where we could excel as a nation, also as an export nation, in terms of exporting that technology. I just wanted to quickly come back on the point of the Denmark pricing, because I think we did misunderstand each other, and it's important we don't leave on the table. I did do my research before I came here, and I've actually got the graph of exactly what the energy costs are per country in Europe. And by the way, you're right, Denmark is right at the top end, so I didn't say Denmark was the cheapest. By the way, the UK is second. This is a mix of gas. This is a mix of... You've made your point. You can just let me respond to it.
Have you got the right point? It was that energy was much more expensive in Denmark.
But that's what I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, so there's no disagreement there.
Yeah.
No disagreement
there. So I'm agreeing with you totally on that. The UK is actually second in Europe. Across the mix of gas and electricity.
Second cheapest?
Second cheapest, actually, across gas and electricity in Europe. These are Eurostat
This is just
statistics.
ordinary commercial rates that the local shop will pay, as opposed to...
No, this is industrial rates, but across SMEs right the way through to high-end users. The point I really wanted to make with that is that my point on Denmark was a different one. I mean, I actually think Denmark have gone too much for wind in terms of that being their own source of energy. That's the reason why they're expensive. Where, however, they have benefited hugely, and that was my point, was that they've created a massive expertise, skills base, knowledge base, and innovation base, which they are exporting around the world. They will continue to drive that, and I suspect in 10 years' time they might be looking rather pretty, because the innovation costs will have gone down quite a lot, energy prices will have come down, and they will have a massive market in terms of being able to export this technology around the world, and we should be doing more of the same, and we can actually do an awful lot of it around marine technologies.
And Jürgen, that's because, as you said, that's because their government backed those sectors, backed industry there. And you know what we need in the UK, this issue about rebalancing isn't a climate change one. It doesn't need to be run by DEC. It needs to be run by the Department of Business. We need an industrial policy. We need a vision of where we're going to get to, and then work back from that of how we get there, not necessarily just setting targets, increasing our costs and hoping it's all going to happen, because it isn't. We need an industrial policy to get us there.
Right. Now, I just want to stick on the issue of electricity capacity, because we've had very little discussion of nuclear, and whether it's greening the economy or greening energy. I mean, are we not basically just saying wind is going to be a little frill around the edge, and nuclear is going to do the heavy lifting if we're going to seriously decarbonise our economy in the next 20 or 30 years? It's just going to be 80% nuclear. We have to be where France has been already. Just a quick comment from the panel on that. I mean, Jürgen, you've made my point.
Well, I mean, it's silly us not loving nuclear because of the dangers when, 60 miles across the channel on Cap de Hard is a darn great French nuclear power station, which we buy the electricity from, by the way, of course. So a safety issue isn't the thing, and I think it's just been dithering on the part of government in terms of getting into it. We need an element of nuclear as part of our base load, and the sooner we get it, the better. I think the other thing is gas, by the way. I think we're going to end up.
The default will be gas if we don't plan. Exactly. Then because you can build a gas station in 2 years. Jane, are you going nuclear?
I'm definitely going nuclear. I think the best thing that can happen to this country now is the lights go out. So I agree with the gentleman who said it earlier on. Power price is going to go up. We're not seeing that at the moment, but it's going to go up. The government thought they could force power price to go up with the carbon floor price. hasn't happened, so there's no investment. No one knows what the electricity market's going to be. I'm a big believer of a full mix of fuels. Nuclear's got to be in it. I think we've got to decide, are we going to be a UK economy, an EU economy, or a global economy? Because I like the idea of the solar panels. I like the idea of nuclear, not necessarily in the UK. You could have a global grid, but it's got to have everybody bought in. We're not on a level playing field. We're not even on a level playing field with our European colleagues.
When you say you think nuclear should be part of the mix, though, I mean, are we really saying it's got to be 80% of the mix, or are we saying 20% of the mix? Because it seems to me that if you're going to really decarbonise electricity, all these other things.
Can you accept a comment from the floor?
I will. I'm just going to clarify. Yeah, no, on that point, I'll come to you straight away. But Jane, just where do you see nuclear?
If you want to decarbonise, it's got to be at least 80%.
Okay, that's
okay.
what there we've got.
I don't necessarily agree with decarbonise.
No, okay. Right, we've got another couple of minutes to take about 2 or 3 contributions from the floor, and then a last one from up here, and then we go and watch the footy. Yeah. So we'll take the gentleman over here who had a very. Yeah, put your hand right up so people can see. That's it. There we go.
Do I need a microphone?
No, now the microphone's coming to you. They know where you are.
Okay, the Academy did a study themselves 2 years ago looking at the energy mix. And the assumption was that the maximum technically possible of wave, wind, solar and so on would be implemented. And the numbers are, I'll say, unbelievable, like 1,000 miles of wave machines and so on. But the shortage of the amount they would generate still needed 8 nuclear power stations. Question, why not abandon the 1,000 miles of waves and build 16 nuclear power stations?
Right, yeah. No,
for my money, that would be far more acceptable to the public, and we wouldn't have to cope with all the variabilities of wind, wave and so on.
And I'm sure there are a lot of very pro-nuclear people in the audience as well.
Not pro-nuclear, it's the arithmetic.
Yeah, well, I mean, and pro-nuclear sometimes, yeah. Okay, so let's take some more questions. We've got a gentleman right here who's very close. Get the microphone over there. Let's be efficient about this, and then we'll pass to the one across the aisle. Yeah.
Peter Chester, I think the meeting might well be reminded of DEC's figures for the comparative cost of these different low-carbon sources published last year. Range of nuclear per megawatt hour, £66 to £74. Onshore wind, 90. Offshore wind, 135. And fossil plus carbon capture and storage, anywhere between 110 and 136 pounds per megawatt hour. And we might make the point that the nuclear
talking to the microphone.
The nuclear would have a load factor of 90-some%, and the offshore wind 35, and the onshore wind 25. So those seem to me to be pretty useful figures in guiding a firm national policy. But certainly the market won't necessarily deliver it. Neither will individual business opportunities, because this needs a national policy.
Okay, and we've had that. If you just pass across the aisle to this gentleman here. Yes, go ahead, Sam. We'll take one more.
Stephen Harris from the Engineer magazine. I've got a quick comment on RP66. I promise. It's with regard to talking about steel. It just struck me that I went to the D-side steelworks at Tuttering recently, and they produced more steel there than they ever did when it was British Steel, but with far, far fewer workers. So it might not be great for British jobs, but I think it's silly to write that off completely. But secondly, I wanted to pick up on what Jürgen had said, I think, briefly about perhaps the kind of lack of vision perhaps in British-owned companies. And we're talking about business opportunities, and I'm interested to know what people think about where the opportunities lie for SMEs being created along the lines of green technology, and how much we're perhaps limited by the lack of big UK companies. We don't have a Siemens. Basically we don't have a Siemens of our own. We don't have a GE, and in the energy sphere itself as well, we don't really have a comparable EDF or E.ON. I don't think. So I'd just be interested to know what people think with regards to how limited we are with the mix of companies we have, and what opportunity there really is for SMEs that's supposed to be a real driver.
Right, and that's probably one we're not going to actually have time to answer, because we're going to get a very brief comment from the panel. We'll take a last question right at the back, a last point I should say. Turn your question, normally we say make a question, but actually I want you to make a point, and then the panel can... ignore it or pick it up. Let's do that. Pleasure.
Alistair Kennedy. The point actually I wanted to make was about the way government sets policy. And I'm just going to use an example to demonstrate that. We cite the breakup of the CGB and the creation of free market electricity as a great success. What government does is soft levers. The reason that made the improvements it did was because gas was deregulated for power generation. Had the UK government changed the charter of the CGB from efficient generation of electricity to efficient use of energy, then you'd have had CHP in this country, which we don't have. You'd have greened the economy because you would be using electricity efficiently. There are many, many more examples like that. We tend to pull the wrong levers through these fiscal measures rather than actually the solution.
That's because the economists took over the asylum.
Right.
I'm going to ask the panel essentially to end on a note of agreement. And the one thing that screams out is policy stability and certainty. Here's the question. Policy certainty and stability, which everybody wants, is also called inflexibility to the people making the policy. It's called unresponsiveness to the news that you're getting about everything. Just give me a quick view on what you think realistically policy should aim at now, bearing in mind that flexibility and certainty are incompatible. Sir Alan.
It's a good one in 2 seconds, isn't it? I would say if I had the power, I would have an industrial policy in the UK for a start off, and that industrial policy would be built around, first of all, the first base would be to create a fertile environment for investment and operations in manufacturing. That would be the first objective, and the second one would be to select specific areas in which, not products, but areas in which one would make substantial investments to bring on the industries in that area. But the first step is to create the fertile environment.
Right. And that remove the impediments that might be.
Well, we generated a list of 31 parameters, which said if you want a great environment, go down the list and create a tilt in every one that you can.
Jane.
I agree with Sir Alan. The one thing I will say is give us an energy framework, but give us a 10-year, 20-year strategy. Because it's going to take us 10 years to develop some of these things that we're talking about now, and don't keep changing your mind.
And if that means we can't change our mind when we want to change our mind because things have changed, we've discovered shale gas, or we've suddenly seen Fukushima has made people scared of nuclear, or technology means we don't have to worry about something that we thought we did have to worry about, we indemnify companies like yours against the losses consequent on changes in policy.
I think we know a lot of information now. We're cleverer today than we were 20, 30 years ago. I think we have a good vision. I think industry has a good vision, and I think we should work. We should have a senior engineering advisor on energy strategy.
That we're cleverer than we were 20 years ago has been belied by the behaviour of the banks.
I'd gamble on tsunamis, by the way.
Gareth, policy.
Right. To add to the previous two speakers, who I agree with, what I would add is that the government need to, for all review of policy and new policy, have a green and growth test. And if each policy doesn't pass the green and growth test, they don't do it.
What if it passes the green test but not the growth test, or the growth test, which is, I think, probably quite a typical. It has to pass both before.
It needs to pass both.
Right,
that's the government says that they want to be the greenest government ever, and they want to rebalance the economy, and they've got to do both.
Right. Jürgen, I'm going to give you. You've been the most positive chap here tonight, mate. I'm really. Thank you so much, and just you can give us the last word.
Well, and finishing on a positive, I entirely agree with what Alan and other two speakers just said. I think there does need to be that policy. We're beginning to work on it, which I think is great news. I do think that policy does need to pick a few sort of growth focus areas. I think one or two of them will be green tech type areas. And by the way, I wouldn't worry that much if in 10 years' time we've actually got it wrong. because even if you decide you're going to go for one of those, the spin-off benefits that come out of ploughing a huge amount of innovation and R&D into one of those industries is absolutely huge. Just give the specific example on offshore wind. It's amazing how much of the R&D is about materials and composites, which actually links right the way over to the aerospace industry. So, you know, you can create those horizontal synergies and you don't lose everything. My slightly separate point on policy was going to be actually more directly an answer to your question, which is that I sometimes think we strive in this country too hard for perfection on policy. And I think we need to spend more time in actually establishing the policy and then leaving it stable for a damn long period of time, even if it has a few inefficiencies. And the benefit of industry getting used to that policy, even if it's got a few warts, is better than chopping and changing and giving that insecurity. And that's exactly what happens in Germany. A lot of the policy in Germany is actually not that great, but just everybody knows how to play the game because it's been stable for the last 20 years.
Because there is a policy, yeah. And we sometimes get the paralysis of analysis in this country as we think about where to put the next London airport or similar issues. Well, I think it's been absolutely fascinating, and thank you for your contributions and questions, and let's thank our panel very much indeed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'd all agree we've had a fascinating and very important discussion tonight. I wouldn't attempt to draw anything from it because a lot has already been said, but there are a couple of points which I think I might make. A lot of the discussion has been about the strategic environment for industry to invest and industry to operate effectively, and there is a glimmer of light, I think, in some of the work which is emerging from government at the moment. BIS are working on an industrial strategy under Vince Cable, and in parallel, Lord Heseltine is carrying out his review of UK competitiveness. So I would encourage everyone here to take the opportunity when it arises to input into those activities and make sure that our views are actually being heard in government about how important these things are. Second point I'd like to make, it was raised that the national academies, this academy ought to be influencing certain things. Well, of course, all four UK national academies do work very hard to influence UK government policy. Sometimes we get listened to. Sometimes we actually get asked for advice on particular issues. My view is that it's not nearly enough, given the expertise that is available through the national academies and our networks. We work on it quite hard to try and get government to listen more to people who have got the expertise which we can tap into. And those here who've listened to this debate, if you have the opportunity to talk to people in the government machine to ensure that they understand that this resource is often freely available to those who wish to listen, then that will only help. But just to conclude, I think our very warm thanks to Jürgen Meyer, to Gareth Stace, to Jane Atkinson, to Sir Alan Rudge, and our fantastic chair, Evan Davis, who's led a phenomenally interesting and fun debate. Thank you all very much indeed.